Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Yusuf Aram. A landmark year for energy. That's how Turkey's energy minister, Alparslan Bayraktar, described the coming year for relations with Libya. Everything will be on the table: exploration rights, joint hydrocarbon projects, renewables, and mining. But with Libya still riven by political divisions and periodic clashes, can these ambitious plans break through? And will a long-delayed election finally be held? Bayraktar was recently in Tripoli for a series of summits, including the Türkiye-Libya Joint Economic Commission, which met for the first time in 17 years. Officials agreed to expand cooperation in petroleum, health, education, and transport. Trade between Turkey and Libya is expected to hit $5 billion this year, with energy at the center. Ankara has been increasing its search for new energy sources, including recent deals with U.S. oil giant Chevron and Somalia. Meanwhile, Libya remains divided. Disputes over oil revenue sharing persist. National elections have yet to be scheduled, and with rival armed groups vying for control, can Libya move past its political deadlock and achieve national reconciliation? For more, joining me now from Tripoli is Guma El-Gamati, leader of the Tagir Party in Libya. From Madrid, Barah Mikhail, professor at St. Louis University. And from London, Tim Eaton, senior research fellow in the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me. It's been a while since we talked about Libya, especially with the agenda being so packed in Gaza, Ukraine, the war drums beating in Iran. But there's things going on in Libya as well. And I mean, I didn't come here with an agenda. So Guma, I want you to set the agenda of what we should be talking about. I mean, right now, what's the most important developments in your country, but also what concerns you or what are the opportunities for 2026?
Sure, Yusuf. First of all, thank you for having me, and hello to your two guests as well. I think I'm sitting here in Tripoli and look at things in Libya in January 2026. Politically, Libya is still divided, is still in a state of conflict, and there is no sign that a permanent, comprehensive conflict resolution is in sight. However, having said that, for the last 5 years, we didn't have any wars, we didn't have any violence. There has been a relatively stable situation militarily, and I think that's a very positive thing, and it's good for stability and for moving forward. Although I think the fact that there has been no wars and no violence is partly due to international players playing a very positive role, including Turkey. Turkey, for the last year, have very good relations with both sides of the conflict in the West and in the East. And I think Turkey is using that as a leverage to stabilize the situation and make sure that the two sides of the conflict don't get into violence and things don't spill over. Also, politically, we've heard recently that the Americans are coming in a big way and they are trying to push the two sides in Tripoli and Benghazi. That is the Haftar family in Benghazi and the Dbeiba internationally recognized government in Tripoli, push them to come together and form some sort of a joint government or just one government for Libya. I think the jury is out. Maybe in the next few days, we will know, because there is an imminent reshuffle in Tripoli, and we will know if that kind of dynamics is going to succeed. That's politically. Now, militarily and security-wise, we are told that in a couple of months, there will be a major military exercise in Sirte, overseen by AFRICOM. And for the first time, the military forces from the east, from the Haftar side, and military forces from the west, from Tripoli, will be joining together in this exercise, along with many, many other countries from Africa and Europe. And I think this is an attempt by America and other players to try to bring the two armies closer so that maybe some sort of a joint military command can be established to join the military forces. Mm-hmm. Now, economically, there has been a major international energy conference in Tripoli in the last few days. Hundreds of international oil and gas companies have attended. The special envoy, Mas'ad Boulos, who's very, very well known, obviously he's close to Trump, I think his son Michael is married to Trump's daughter, and he's his special envoy and advisor to Africa. Mis'ad Bolis is here. He's been to Tripoli before and to Benghazi. This is not the first visit, and he attended the energy conference. We hear that major deals have been signed between the NOC of Libya, National Oil Corporation, and major international companies like the French Total Energy with ConocoPhillips, the American company, together with the NOC, with 25 years investment worth about $20 billion to develop the oil and gas sector in Libya and boost production by somewhere like 800,000 barrels a day. We also hear that another major American company, Chevron, has signed an MOU with the NOC. So there seems to be at the moment a lot of interest, especially from America, in the Libya's natural resources, which are mainly oil and gas. Libya holds the highest oil reserves in Africa and also holds very high reserves of gas. And obviously energy is very important today. We saw how Trump jumped on Venezuela to control the oil there. Venezuela has the highest reserves in the world. And I think Trump's strategy, as some people say, is to try to control the sources of energy around the world so that he can leverage that against China in their trade war. So, so that explains maybe now the sudden urge and interest in the energy sector in Libya, which is the biggest natural resource that Libya has, especially from the American, but also from the French and the Italians. And I'm not sure, maybe PP from the UK as well, and Turkey as well. Obviously, Turkey is very keen.
Seems to be a lot of interest. Definitely seems to be a lot of interest. I want to move on to Bara. Guma said militarily calm, but politically unstable. Bara, do you foresee elections anytime soon? And also, if no elections, is this fragmentation potentially permanent?
Yeah, very good question. We've been thinking of and mentioning the possibility for the political process to lead somewhere, and it looks like the UN is active again when it comes to trying to have something done that could lead to elections. We saw with some initiatives. We see it also with all the I would say all the talks and all the meetings that are happening between people from one side and the other. But to be honest, at the same time, one should say, if you look at the UN Special Envoy to Libya and her statements on what is ongoing, for instance, her statements that have been brought to the UN in itself, there is also a feeling of frustration because the political process is not moving forward at the end of the day. I think that we keep insisting on the fact that elections could be a solution for Libya's perspectives, but the fact is that there are, as Goma just said before, the divisions that are prevailing there are something that keeps a kind of stumbling block when it comes to being able to moving forward, to being able to have something consolidated or put together. Now, interestingly, that does not mean that everything is stuck, meaning that when it comes to the political process in itself, when it comes to the UN trying to push for a path, trying to push for perspectives, well, it's difficult to move forward and it's not new. But some initiatives are happening at the same time. When you look at the economy, I would say one very important achievement that we've had during this Libya Economic Forum is the fact that Egypt and the Tripoli government have signed an agreement, a memorandum of understanding, more precisely. This means that when it comes to economy, and even when it comes to some military perspectives, with the US pushing for having something brought together, we can have some, I would say, at least some proto-initiatives, some initial initiatives that could lead to something. But is this the global picture? Absolutely not. So to try and bring, I would say, a short answer to your question now, fragmentation, unfortunately, is still prevailing there in Libya. I am not sure that we are ready to have institutions brought together, at least not at the political level. And the fact is that everybody is trying to kind of show some sense of responsibility, but at the same time, nothing is getting these opposing sides, I would say, to definitely concretize something that would be promising for the rest of the prospects for Libya, at least on the short term.
Tim, I want to ask you about increased American interests. I mean, is Libya the new area of interest for US President Donald Trump? Is that the new challenge for him? I need to solve Libya? Because he seems to be drawn to these types of global issues and global challenges, war in Ukraine, Gaza, what's been happening with Iran, Venezuela. Some of them he's been successful, some of them there's been kidnappings, let's say. And I think Guma touched upon that, saying, touching on the Venezuela example. How do you see an increased U.S. presence or increased U.S. interest in Libya?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. From my perspective, we've seen the structure of US engagement change a little. What we've seen is a move away from more institutional US engagement across the piece towards the empowerment of special envoys, and in the case of Libya, the envoy for Africa, Masad Boulos. And it really seems that Mr. Boulos has come with a clear agenda in terms of putting economic issues first. The American strategy has been very clear in its goals to try and engage economically and form partnerships. So I think that has to be the lens through which you see this. The extent to which Mr. Boulos speaks for the White House more widely is perhaps open to question, but it's very clear that these envoys working for President Trump are looking to bring deals to the table, are looking to bring wins. And it's very clear in the case of Libya that there are deals to be done in the oil sector. And we've heard from our previous speakers and from the introduction that we're at quite a pivotal moment for Libya's oil sector. Production has been increasing. In some ways, this is a really good news story. There are win-wins that can be got here. What's interesting, however, is that the situation on the ground is somewhat contradictory to that good news story. We're seeing an economy that's struggling, flagging, massive inflation, queues at the banks and queues at the petrol stations. So perhaps the conundrum at the heart of this is that there are big deals potentially being done for the long term for tens of billions of dollars, while the country is still operating a massive deficit in spending because they don't have an agreed budget. We're seeing increasing economic problems. So the benefits from the oil sector aren't trickling down to the streets. And that raises the question of how sustainable any deals at this high level might be, particularly if they're made with specific politicians that might not be around forever. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of the conundrum that a lot of us are dealing with at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Guma, I want to ask you about the regional shakeup that's been happening post-October 7th. I mean, when we look at Libya since 2011, you see the foreign actors and the foreign actors' relationships with each other outside of Libya and how it reflects inside of Libya. But there's been a lot of changes. I mean, Egypt and Turkey were on opposite sides. They now have a much warmer relationship. Same with the Saudis and the Turks. The Emiratis have drifted away from the Saudis. Russia is now much more preoccupied within its own borders and in Ukraine. How are all these developments impacting their influence inside of Libya? Has Libya felt the changes outside of its country reflected inside?
Well, not yet, because over the last 15 years, there has been at least up to 11 countries getting involved in Libya. Some positively, mostly detrimentally. And the lack of alignment between these countries and the competing interests of those countries have had a detrimental effect on Libya, has fueled the conflict in Libya and has prolonged the suffering and prevented Libya from stabilizing permanently and getting started on development, state building, institution building, and economic development. However, in the recent months and year, obviously there has been changes. I mean, the fact that Turkey and Egypt are working together. Now Saudi Arabia is playing a much more prominent role, closely with Egypt and Turkey against the Emiratis. The Russians perhaps not as prominent as before, and now we see the Americans and the Italians are getting much more involved. So maybe there could be a better opportunity for more alignment between these players, and that might have a positive effect on stability in Libya. From my point of view as a Libyan, what I want is I want the conflict in Libya to end. I want permanent stability. I want a political settlement, a permanent, lasting, sustainable political settlement. And I feel that some of the countries who are involved in Libya are an obstacle to that and preventing that. So unless the big measures, the big players like America, UK, France, Turkey, unless they take a very proactive and decisive action to say enough is enough, we want Libya stabilized, because the stability of Libya is for the good of everybody. If America coming in now with a transactional policy who wants to cash in on the energy sector in Libya, and Turkey as well wants to benefit from the maritime agreement and other opportunities, what they need to realize is that Libya has to be stable, has to be secure. There has to be a permanent political settlement, and only that will create an environment in Libya where all these countries can do business in Libya and benefit, and hopefully the benefit will be mutual for both Libya and those countries, and national interests of both Libya and those countries will be served.
Okay. Bara, is Libya stable enough to attract investment right now? I mean, obviously these energy projects that are being talked about are going to require billions of dollars of investment. Can these companies and can these countries comfortably invest?
I mean, I agree with your two other guests on the fact that there's been some evolutions in Libya over the 4 or 5 last years. So it makes no doubt that in terms of security, we are in something different. But this does not mean at the same time that we can talk about stabilization. Now, it is true that the positioning or the stance, or let's say the approach that many countries are having towards the Libyan markets today is an indicator on the fact that they feel a bit more comfortable. But then there are also, I would say, there would be a hierarchy to set there. My feeling that the Chinese, for example, see a huge potential in Libya, but they're still wondering about the extent to which they could risk themselves somehow. In change, you mentioned, I mean, your guests mentioned countries like Italy that has had a long-term interest for Libya. I think that it is kind of involving itself more. When it comes to the US, obviously, it's been said a lot. The US has an interest for the energy. I wouldn't forget also about the fact that the US has an interest also for all what relates to security and terrorist-related aspects. I mean, this is something that is still quite present when it comes to the U.S. approach to Libya, renewal, I would say, of the interest for security prospects. But that said, short answer, it's not stable enough to encourage companies to really invest. But at the same time, we can see that some projects are being put forward, including in this Libya forum that we just mentioned. And we see an interest by more and more companies to at least have some role when it comes to, of course, the oil and gas, but also when it comes to infrastructures. And here, both on the eastern side and the western side of Libya, we see more and more projects being developed in a way that definitely indicates that we may have entered in a new phase, in a new cycle that is more promising than what was before.
Mm-hmm. Tim, you obviously have the major oil players like Chevron from the US, Total from Europe, but a country like Turkey, where you have TPAO, the state oil company of Turkey, what type of opportunities does a middle power, or at least its oil company, have inside of Libya? What can it do?
Well, I think Turkey has great relationships at the moment, perhaps more so than any external player. It has deep relations with the power brokers on either side. Sometimes those have been a bit troubling with the GNU in recent months, but let's not forget it was only May last year where it was Turkey really that prevented an outbreak of conflict in Tripoli. Turkey has gone to great means to expand its relationship with the east of Libya and with Field Marshal Haftar, and has very cordial relationships there across the political, economic, and security spheres. So in that sense, Turkey comes from a very strong footing, deep relationships of trust, and perhaps also a lot of understanding of actually what is happening on the ground in Libya, which is not always easy to observe from the outside. So I think in that sense, it would be highly probable that Turkey does quite well out of the tenders that are to come and will look to reap some economic rewards from its engagement. Of course, it also has that outstanding issue of the Memorandum of Understanding, which it hopes the Eastern-based House of Representatives will push through as legislation. which it hasn't yet. So there are still a lot of goals that remain unrealized for Turkey, but it finds itself in quite a strong position.
Mm-hmm. Guma, the bilateral trade target for Turkey and Libya is $5 billion for this coming year. What type of strategic projects could help both countries reach that target? And also, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan met with the Libyan defense minister about 2 or 3 hours ago. Very vague readout. What do you think the two discussed?
Well, I think Turkey over the last, not just 15 years, but 50 years, have done a lot of business in Libya. Major Turkish companies have undertaken projects, big construction projects, power stations. Only 2 days ago, I met with the country manager of a major power station building company from Turkey. He said they are doing 2 big projects, one in the east and one in the west in Tripoli. And also the maritime agreement, once it's ratified by the parliament in Benghazi, which should be done, although Egypt is resisting that, that will open the way for Turkey and Libya to cooperate on exploring for oil and gas offshore. And as I said, the Turkish companies are very popular when it comes to construction projects in Libya. They have been in the past, and I think they will remain, and they will do a lot of business in the future, simply because there are very strong ties between Libya and Turkey. These are historical, cultural, and political ties as well. So, and if Turkey continues to push this line of trying to leverage all sides to prevent war, to prevent the breakout of violence, and to stabilize Libya, and Turkey can work very closely with America as well. Erdogan and Trump get on very well. So they can achieve a lot in terms of helping Libyans to stabilize and end this conflict and achieve a permanent political settlement. That will create even a more conducive environment in Libya for Turkish companies and other international companies to do a lot of business. Libya is going to need major development work, probably hundreds of billions in the coming 20, 30 years.
Mm-hmm. But I want to ask you a little about the European Union. I mean, when you look at EU countries, what are the major opportunities that they're chasing? Because obviously the Turks, the Americans, they're going to all be competing for the same projects. What do you see the EU bringing to the table?
Well, if you're talking about the EU as a global actor, the European Union and its 27 members, I fear that their only interest, I would say, or their main interest, at least when it comes to Libya's prospects and perspectives, still relate to migrations. And this is something that we saw through the moves of Mrs. von der Leyen. We saw how she was kind of happy also of seeing the Italy strategy towards Libya in terms of migration. It applies to Libya and it applies to other countries. We can see it in the case of Mauritania, for example. So, I mean that the interest of the EU as an institution, as a global institution, I think is more focused on this. And at times where we see that, of course, there are tensions, I would say, within many countries because of the migration issues, because of the fact that they are explaining why the far right and the very conservative parties are having their moments now. So we get back to one of the other, I would say, long-term diseases of the European Union, which is the fact that strategies that are being brought by Europeans happen to be national strategies. And this is where we see that there is no, let's say, there is no consensus really, or there is no agreement when it comes to having a collective approach of Europeans towards the Libyan file. This is where we see that companies, of course, oil companies are the ones that are trying to have the biggest share of the pie somehow. And this is where Italy is in a very good position at the European level, which is not something new, of course. And then I would say that politically speaking, we can see also how now the UK is not part of the EU, but let's say among these European actors that is having a strategy of its own, despite the fact that we hear less about it today. France is more discreet at the same time, but it has an interest for kind of, having more, I would say, strengthened relations with Tripoli, with the internationally recognized government. We see Germany also is having a renewed interest towards the country. But I mean, all what I'm saying, and I could build on and on with these examples, the fact is that if we're talking about a European collective common strategy, honestly, there is a big lack of consensus on what could bring the Europeans as a whole to have a unified strategy beyond, of course, once again, the migration issues.
Gentlemen, we're out of time. Guma, Bara, Tim, I want to thank you for sharing your insight. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Yusuf Aram. If you got any comments, please share them with us on X at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find more exclusive content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.